They say justice is a river that runs slow but steady, carving its path through stone with quiet persistence. I learned early on that it rarely comes free or on its own. Sometimes, we must build it ourselves, drop by drop, day after day, with the patience of a weaver stitching a quilt, joining each piece until it becomes something greater than the sum of its parts. My name is Margaret Hensley, though folks around here in the hills of eastern Tennessee call me Miss Maggie or Maggie of the Roots, for I know every herb and plant in these mountains like the lines on my hands. At 85, with hair white as frost and hands worn by time, I sit on my porch in this simple clapboard house, ready to share a story I've kept locked away for nearly half a century. It's a tale of pain, yes, but also of redemption, a story few have heard, and one I've only now found the courage to tell. Where are you hearing this from? Are you in the rolling hills of Kentucky, the plains of Kansas, or maybe across the sea in England or New Zealand? I've been told folks from all corners listen to my tales, and that warms my old heart. This story will stir your soul, so prepare yourself. It's not a light one, but it's true, and sometimes truth is the heaviest thing we carry. Secrets are like stones in your pocket. You carry them so long you forget their weight, but they're always there, pressing against you. I was born in 1940, in a world where women's voices were rarely heard, where our worth was measured by the meals we cooked and the children we bore. My parents were tenant farmers, scratching a living from rocky soil. I learned to hoe fields before I could read, and school stopped for me at 4th grade. A girl don't need books to keep a house, my father said. At 17, I married Thomas, a quiet boy from a nearby holler. It wasn't love, not the kind you read about, but necessity. In those days, marriage was a contract, a way to survive. But Thomas was kind, a rarity then. He never raised a hand to me, treated me as his partner. We worked our small plot together, corn, beans, a few hogs, and built a life that, while poor, was honest. In 1960, our daughter, Sarah, was born. She was a bright spark, with hazel eyes like her father's and a laugh that could chase away the gloomiest day. Thomas would carry her on his shoulders, pointing out the stars, promising her the world. By 5, Sarah could read simple words and loved the hymns I sang while we shelled peas. We were happy, the kind of happy that feels too fragile to last. And it was. On a crisp October morning in 1967, Thomas left for the sawmill where he'd taken a job to buy Sarah new school shoes. The work was grueling, the machinery old and unforgiving. That afternoon, as Sarah played in the yard with a cornhusk doll, I heard a shout from the road. I ran out to find 2 men carrying Thomas on a plank, his body limp, blood soaking his shirt. A blade had slipped, they said, cutting deep into his chest. He died in my arms, his last breath a whisper, "Look after Sarah." At 27, I was a widow with a 7-year-old daughter, no money, and no safety net. In rural Tennessee then, a woman alone was a problem, a burden. Neighbors brought cornbread and condolences at first, but kindness fades fast when there's no surplus to share. I worked our land harder, selling what little we grew at the market. Sarah helped, scattering crows from the corn, fetching water from the creek. At night, I taught her to read by lamplight, determined she'd have the chances I never did. But the soil was tired, the rains scarce, and whispers grew louder. She needs a man, they said. A woman alone can't raise a child proper. 8 months after Thomas's death, his older brother, William, appeared at our door. William was 42, unmarried, a rarity that raised eyebrows. He worked as a clerk at a feed store in town, a man with a sharp jaw and eyes that never settled. "I'm here to do my duty," he said, stepping inside without asking. Family looks after family. He'd been distant before, showing up only for funerals or baptisms, but now he claimed his place as our protector. He'd moved to a boarding house nearby, he said, and would help with expenses. Fix the sagging porch, make sure we didn't starve. At first, I was grateful. William brought flour, sugar, sometimes a cut of pork. The preacher called it God's provision, praising William's charity. But Sarah didn't take to him. She'd shrink when he came near, her chatter fading to silence. "I don't like how he watches me, Mama," she said one night, her voice small. It's not like Daddy. I brushed it off, telling myself she was just shy, that we needed William's help. How many times do we ignore the truth because it's too heavy to hold? William's visits grew frequent, his presence heavier. He deposited his things in our spare room to save on rent and keep us safe. I agreed. What choice did I have? He paid for our groceries, patched the roof, earned nods of approval from the community. But his help came with strings. He criticized my cooking, my housekeeping, how I raised Sarah. "You're too soft on her," he'd say. "She'll grow up weak." He controlled what I bought, who I spoke to, always reminding me, "I'm the one keeping this roof over your head." Sarah grew quieter, her spark dimming. She'd linger near me, avoiding William's gaze, his gifts, a ribbon, a piece of candy, left untouched. I noticed his touches lingered too long, his eyes too bold. I told myself I was imagining it, that he was family, that we needed him. But doubt gnawed at me, a warning I couldn't silence. It was a sweltering August day in 1968, a year after William moved in. Sarah had a slight fever, so I left her home while I went to the market to sell my jams. "Rest, my darling," I said, kissing her forehead. "I'll be back soon." She looked at me, eyes wide with something I couldn't name. "Hurry, Mama," she whispered. The market was busy, but an unease I couldn't shake drove me home early. As I neared our house, the silence was wrong, no birds, no hum of life. The door was shut tight, unusual for summer. I crept inside, heart pounding, and heard a sound from Sarah's room, soft, choked sobs. The door was ajar, and through the crack, I saw a sight that burned itself into my soul. William, his bulk over my 8-year-old daughter, her dress bunched at her waist, her face twisted in terror, eyes squeezed shut. Rage exploded in me, a wildfire that consumed fear, doubt, everything. I grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the kitchen and stormed in, screaming a sound I didn't recognize as my own. I swung with all my strength, the skillet crashing against his head. He staggered, blood streaming from his temple, and for a moment, I thought I'd killed him. But he lunged, pinning me against the wall, his breath hot with fury. "You'll regret this," he snarled, slapping me hard enough to blur my vision. "No one will believe you, a hysterical widow against me, the man who's kept you fed." He left, slamming the door, and I crawled to Sarah, who was curled in a ball, trembling. I held her, my tears mixing with hers, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "He won't hurt you again, my love." But his words echoed, who would believe us? The sheriff was his drinking buddy. The preacher called him a saint. We were alone, and he knew it. That night, as Sarah slept fitfully with the help of chamomile tea, I sat by her side, my mind racing. Running away was impossible, no money, no refuge. Reporting him would be futile, his reputation shielded him. But I was her mother, and a mother's love is a force fiercer than fear. I swore then, by Thomas's memory, by Sarah's broken trust, that William would pay, not with a quick death, but with a slow, deliberate reckoning. He'd feel the helplessness he'd inflicted, the loss of control, the betrayal of his own body. I just needed a way. 3 days later, I took Sarah to the only person I thought could help, Miss Cora, a woman who lived alone by the river, an hour's walk from town. Some called her a healer, others a conjure woman. She was a black woman, her age a mystery, with silver braids and eyes that saw through pretense. I'd met her once when Sarah was a colicky baby, and her teas had worked wonders. Now, I hoped she'd have answers. Miss Cora's cabin was humble, surrounded by neat rows of herbs, mint, yarrow, plants I didn't know. She sat on her porch, as if expecting us. "Trouble's got a scent," she said, ushering us inside. I smelled it coming. Without judgment, she listened as I poured out our story, Thomas's death, William's arrival, the horror I'd witnessed. Sarah sat silent, clutching my hand. "What do you want, Margaret?" Miss Cora asked when I finished. "Justice," I said, my voice steady. "Not the law's justice, men write those rules for themselves. I want him to suffer as he made my daughter suffer, to lose everything he holds dear." She studied me, her gaze piercing. That's a long road, child. It'll cost you, maybe more than you know. Are you sure? For Sarah, I said, I'd walk through fire. Miss Cora nodded. Then stay here. You and the girl are safe. We'll start with healing her body and soul. Then, we'll talk about justice. We stayed with Miss Cora, sleeping in a small room fragrant with dried herbs. She tended to Sarah with teas that eased her nightmares, stories that brought back her smile. By day, Sarah trailed Miss Cora, learning plant names and simple crafts. At night, under a sky thick with stars, Miss Cora taught me the secrets of the earth, plants that heal, plants that harm, plants that transform. She showed me how to harvest in the right moon phase, how to grind roots into powders, how to mask bitter tastes with molasses or spice. Black haw can weaken a man's limbs over time, she said, holding up a gnarled root. Pokeweed, in tiny doses, confuses the mind. Mix them right, and no doctor will know what's wrong. She taught me patience, precision, the art of slow change. Any fool can kill fast, she said. The craft is in making them feel their own ruin, bit by bit. I soaked up her knowledge, driven by a fire that never dimmed. Sarah began to heal, her laughter returning, though her eyes held a new weight. Miss Cora saw her gift, too. That girl's got the touch, she said. Plants listened to her. One day, she could be a healer. After 6 months, I knew it was time. I'm going back, I told Miss Cora one evening, as we sorted dried leaves. To him. She set down her basket, eyes sharp. Why? You're safe here. Sarah's mending. Because he needs to pay, I said. And I need to be close to make it happen. I'll leave Sarah with you, she'll be safe. I'll visit, bring what we need, keep learning. Miss Cora sighed. You're strong, Margaret, but this path has shadows. It'll change you. I know, I said. But some things are worth the cost. We spent weeks preparing, powders hidden in cloth sachets, tinctures in unmarked vials, recipes to slip into food unnoticed. Miss Cora taught me to start small, so small no one would suspect. Patience, she said. Let his body betray him slowly. Leaving Sarah was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I'll come back soon, I promised, hugging her tight. Miss Cora will keep you safe. Her eyes searched mine, but she nodded, clutching a small charm Miss Cora had given her. I walked back to the house, my bundle light but my heart heavy. The place was a mess, dust thick, bottles strewn about. William had let it fall apart without us. I cleaned, cooked, made myself indispensable, knowing he'd be home soon. When he walked in, his eyes narrowed. What's this? He growled. I've come back, I said, eyes down, voice soft. If you'll have me. Where's the girl? With cousins in Kentucky, I lied. Until I'm sure things are right between us. He smirked, smug. Realized you can't make it without me, huh? Nobody wants a widow and her brat. I swallowed my rage, nodding. You were right, William. I was foolish. I'm grateful for your help. He bought it, his ego too big to question my meekness. You'll sleep in the back, he said. And you'll earn your keep. Yes, William, I said, turning to the stove. Supper's almost ready. I started small, a pinch of powder in his coffee, a drop of tincture in his stew. He didn't notice, too busy reveling in my submission. I cleaned, cooked, mended, all while watching, waiting. He was cautious at first, sniffing his food, but my deference disarmed him. By the 3rd month, he stopped checking. The first signs came in the 5th month, a slight shake in his hand. A stumble on the porch. Just tired, he muttered, brushing it off. I played the doting sister-in-law, suggesting rest, serving more of the beans he loved, laced with my special blend. Every week, I trekked to Miss Cora's, bringing Sarah's drawings, updating Miss Cora on William's decline. Sarah was blooming, reading fluently, helping Miss Cora with remedies. He's not better, is he? She asked once, her voice steady. No, I said. And he won't be. Miss Cora handed me fresh supplies. Slow and steady, Margaret. Don't let anger rush you. By the second year, William's symptoms were undeniable. His hands trembled constantly, spilling his drink. He tired quickly, his temper flaring as his strength waned. Must be the damp, he grumbled, seeing the town doctor, who prescribed tonics that did nothing. I hid my satisfaction, tending to him with false concern, slipping more of the mixture into his meals. He lost his job in the third year, his hands too unsteady to stack sacks of feed. His pride crumbled, and he leaned on me more, trusting the remedies I offered. The irony was bitter, he'd taken my power, and now I held his life in my hands. Sarah returned that year, now 11, stronger, wiser. Miss Cora deemed it safe, William was too weak to harm her. When he saw her, fear flickered in his eyes. "Hello, Uncle William," Sarah said, her voice clear, unshaken. He couldn't meet her gaze. Sarah settled back into our home, helping with chores, watching as I cared for William. She never stayed alone with him, not from fear but choice. At night, we'd sit on the porch, whispering under the stars. "Is he dying, Mama?" she asked one night. "Not dying," I said. "Changing. His body's failing, but his mind's clear. He's trapped, like he made you feel." She nodded, thoughtful. "Miss Cora says every action has a reaction. He's getting his." I marveled at her wisdom, but a seed of doubt took root. Was my justice too cruel? I pushed it aside, focusing on the plan, on Sarah's safety, on the slow drip of retribution. By the fourth year, William was a shadow of himself, reliant on me for everything. The town praised my devotion, blind to the truth. But as I looked into Sarah's eyes, I began to wonder, was this justice, or had I become something else? The moon hung low that night, casting long shadows across the yard. I sat by William's bed, watching his chest rise and fall, his hands twitching even in sleep. Tomorrow, I'd decide, continue the doses or ease them, let him linger or let him fade. Sarah's words echoed, balance, not vengeance. But the fire in me still burned, and the path ahead was unclear. One thing was certain, this wasn't the end. The river of justice was still carving its course, and I'd see it through, drop by drop. The moon hung low that night, its silver light spilling over the yard, casting shadows that danced like ghosts of the past. I sat by William's bed, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, his hands twitching in sleep. The room smelled of liniment and the faint bitterness of the tinctures I'd mixed into his supper. Tomorrow, I'd face a choice, keep the doses steady, let them wane, or push them further. Sarah's words lingered in my mind, soft but heavy, balance, not vengeance. The fire that had driven me for years still burned, but its heat was tinged with doubt. Was this justice, or had I forged a chain that bound me as much as it did him? The river of my resolve still flowed, but its course was no longer certain. William's decline had become the rhythm of our days. By the 5th year since my return, he was a husk of the man who'd once loomed over us. His legs, once strong enough to stride through town without pause, now refused to carry him. I moved him from bed to chair with effort, his body limp as a rag doll. His hands, which had gripped me in anger, could no longer hold a spoon without trembling. His speech slurred, words tangling into murmurs only I could decipher. Yet his eyes, those sharp, restless eyes, remained clear, watching me with a mix of fear, anger, and something like understanding. He knew, or at least suspected, that his ruin was no accident. But what could he do? The town saw me as a saint, tending to my ailing brother-in-law with a devotion they mistook for love. Sarah, now 12, had grown into a quiet strength. The carefree girl who once sang hymns was gone, replaced by a young woman with steady hands and a mind sharp as Miss Cora's. She helped with the garden, tended the chickens, and learned the remedies I'd begun selling to neighbors, salves for burns, teas for fevers. Her knowledge of plants rivaled mine, a gift Miss Cora had nurtured. "She's got the touch," Miss Cora had said, and I saw it in the way Sarah coaxed life from stubborn soil, in the way she spoke to the herbs as if they listened. She watched William's decline without pity, her hazel eyes unyielding. "He's paying, Mama," she said once, as we shelled peas on the porch. "But it don't bring back what was." Her words cut deeper than I'd expected. I'd thought justice would mend the fractures in our lives, but it hadn't. Sarah carried her scars silently, and I carried mine. Each dose I slipped into William's food a reminder of the day I'd failed to protect her. Yet I couldn't stop. Not yet. The plan was too far along, the river too deep to turn back. Miss Cora remained our anchor. I visited her weekly, trekking the hour to her riverside cabin with Sarah's letters or a basket of our garden's yield. She'd listen as I described William's symptoms, the tremors, the weakness, the fog that crept into his mind. "You're walking a thin line, Margaret," she warned one afternoon, her silver braids glinting in the sun as she ground yarrow in a mortar. "Justice is a blade that cuts both ways. Don't let it carve out your soul." "I'm doing this for Sarah," I said, but even to my ears, the words sounded hollow. Miss Cora's eyes softened. "You're doing it for you, too. For the woman who lost her husband, her choices, her trust. Ain't no shame in that, but don't lie to yourself. Vengeance don't heal what's broken." I wanted to argue, to insist that every pinch of powder was for my daughter, but her words clung to me. At night, as I lay on the narrow cot beside Sarah's bed, I wondered if I'd become someone Thomas wouldn't recognize. He'd been a gentle man, quick to forgive. Would he have understood this path? Or would he have seen it as a poison not just in William's body but in mine? William's condition worsened steadily. By the 6th year, he was bedbound, his world shrinking to the 4 walls of his room. I fed him, bathed him, changed his linens, each act a performance of care that masked the truth. The neighbors marveled at my patience. "You're a blessing, Maggie," they'd say, dropping off a loaf of bread or a jar of preserves. "Not many would do what you do." I'd smile, murmur thanks, and return to my work, slipping a drop of tincture into William's tea. The irony was a bitter comfort. He'd taken my power, and now his survival depended on my hands. Sarah began to help with his care, not out of kindness but a need to see the consequences of his actions. She'd bring his tray, adjust his pillow, her movements precise and detached. William avoided her gaze, his eyes darting to the wall whenever she entered. "He's scared of me," she said one evening, as we sat under the stars. "He knows what he did." "He knows," I agreed, my voice low. "And he knows he's paying for it." She turned to me, her face half-lit by moonlight. "How long, Mama? How long does he have to suffer before it's enough?" I had no answer. The question haunted me, echoing Miss Cora's warnings. I'd set out to make William feel Sarah's helplessness, but now I wondered if I'd gone too far, if the justice I'd crafted had become something darker. Yet stopping felt like betraying Sarah, betraying myself. So I continued, the doses steady, the river flowing. In the 7th year, when Sarah was 14, I decided she deserved the full truth. She'd suspected for years. I saw it in the way she watched me stir William's meals, the way she noted his symptoms with a healer's eye. One night, under a full moon that bathed the porch in silver, I called her to sit beside me on the bench Thomas had built, its wood worn smooth by time. "There's something you need to know," I said, my hands clasped tight to keep them from trembling. "About William's sickness." She nodded, her eyes steady. "It's not natural, is it?" "No," I said, the word heavy. "When we stayed with Miss Cora, after we left, I learned things. Not just how to heal, but how to change. The powders, the teas, they're not medicine. They're making him this way, slowly, so he feels what it's like to be trapped, powerless, like he made you feel." Sarah was silent, her gaze fixed on the moon. "You're poisoning him," she said, not a question but a statement. "Not to kill," I said quickly. "To transform. To take away his strength, his control, bit by bit. It's justice, Sarah." She turned to me, her face unreadable. "Miss Cora says justice without mercy is just another kind of cruelty. That we should seek balance, not just punishment." Her words struck like a stone. I'd heard them from Miss Cora, but coming from Sarah, they carried a different weight. She was no longer the frightened child I'd sworn to protect. She was a young woman, shaping her own understanding of right and wrong. And I was her example. "Do you think I'm wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She considered this, her brow furrowing. "What he did was evil. He deserves to hurt. But I wonder, when is it enough? When does it stop being about me and start being about something else?" I had no answer. For years, I'd been so certain, driven by a fury that felt righteous. But now, seeing the wisdom in my daughter's eyes, I felt a crack in my resolve. "I don't know how to stop," I admitted. "Not after everything." Sarah took my hand, her grip firm. "We'll find a way, Mama. Not to forgive him, never that, but to let go, for us." In the weeks that followed, I began to reduce the doses. Not enough to reverse the damage, William's body was too far gone, but enough to slow his decline. It wasn't mercy, not exactly, but a step toward the balance Sarah spoke of. She helped more with his care, not out of pity but a quiet resolve to face the man who'd hurt her, to prove he no longer held power over her. William's eyes followed her, a mix of shame and fear, but he never spoke of that day. Perhaps he couldn't, or perhaps he knew it would change nothing. By the 8th year, William was a prisoner in his own flesh. His muscles had withered, his voice a faint rasp. I fed him soft foods, wiped his chin, turned him to prevent sores. The town's praise grew louder. Mrs. Hensley, the selfless widow, a model of Christian charity. If only they knew. I whispered to him sometimes, late at night, as I adjusted his blankets. "Feel this, William? This is what it's like to have no choice, no control. This is what you did to her." His eyes would widen, but his tongue couldn't form a reply. The punishment fit his crime, yet Sarah's words gnawed at me. When is it enough? Miss Cora's health began to falter that year. At nearly 90, her body was tiring, though her spirit remained fierce. Sarah and I spent days at her cabin, brewing teas, tending her garden, repaying the care she'd given us. "You did what you had to, Margaret," she said one evening, her voice a whisper. "Don't carry guilt for protecting your own. But true justice ain't in their suffering, it's in your living, thriving despite them." Her words settled deep, a counterpoint to the fire that had driven me. Miss Cora passed on a quiet night, under the same full moon she'd always loved, her hand in Sarah's. She left us her cabin, her books, her knowledge, a legacy of healing and resilience. We buried her by the river, among the herbs she'd tended, and returned home with heavy hearts. When we arrived, we found William dead. The neighbor I'd paid to watch him said he'd simply stopped breathing in his sleep, his face calm, as if he'd slipped away without a fight. I stood over his body, expecting triumph, but felt only a strange emptiness. There was no joy in his death, no relief, just a quiet void where my anger had been. Sarah stood beside me, her hand on my arm. "It's over, Mama," she said. "We're free." We buried William in a simple grave, the preacher offering words about forgiveness that felt hollow. No one knew the truth, no one but Sarah, Miss Cora, and me. The neighbors mourned him as a good man fallen ill, blind to the monster he'd been. I let them believe it, their ignorance was our shield. Sarah and I moved to Miss Cora's cabin, a fresh start in a place untainted by William's shadow. Sarah took up Miss Cora's work, her gift for healing drawing folks from miles around. She mixed salves, brewed teas, listened to their troubles with a patience I envied. I helped, but she was the heart of it, her hand steady, her spirit unbroken. She married at 20, a kind man named Daniel, who worked the land with the same quiet strength Thomas had. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who grew up running through the herb beds, learning the names of plants, the stories of the stars. I never remarried. Not from bitterness, but because my heart was full. Sarah, my grandchildren, the knowledge I'd gained, the peace I'd fought for. William's life, in its twisted way, taught me what strength truly was, not in control or cruelty, but in endurance, in building something beautiful from broken pieces. Now, at 85, I sit on this porch, the river murmuring nearby, and share this story for the first time. I can't say if what I did was right or wrong. Justice, I learned, is no clean thing. It's messy, costly, and leaves scars of its own. I protected Sarah the only way I knew, in a world that offered no other path. If you're listening, perhaps you've faced your own impossible choices, your own battles for what's right. Sometimes, we fight with the tools we have, not the ones we wish for. Sometimes, the best we can do is carry our scars with dignity and keep moving forward. This is my story, a truth I've held for decades. It's a story of pain, yes, but also of redemption, of a woman with no voice, no power, who found a way to protect her own, to carve justice from a world that turned its back. I share it not as a guide, but as a testament to the paths we walk when there's no other road. Thank you for listening, my dears. Tell me, what did you think of this tale from my life? Until we meet again, may you find your own strength, drop by drop.